Now understand, since the destruction of the Kingdom of Judea, there has not been a single independent state called Palestine set up anytime in here.
The Zionists saw themselves as coming home to the ancestral land of the Jewish people. And that is the drive and the passion behind Israel. The Arabs had been in occupation of this same land since the Middle Ages, and they saw no reason why their land should go from them. So that the difficulty in accommodating to the existence of the State of Israel is inherent. We're dealing with something that is of its nature, has deep roots, and is rather intractable.
Hello, my name is Johnny Vedmore, and today we're going to check if there's been a conspiracy by the Palestinian people to pretend that they had an identity and a cohesive group that was coherent and notable before 1948. Yes, it's been claimed by Ben Shapiro, the Rand Institute, and others, as we will hear, that the Palestinian people were not really a people before 1948, and they did not own the land properly. This is one of the excuses that comes up over and over again for why Israel should be able to occupy the land. Let's go and investigate. This is News Theory. So don't let anybody tell you that the media has never been in control of anything, because as you see in the center of this map, the media were in control back then of a place called media, and that was in 600 BC. That's what we're looking at here, a map of 600 BC. This is after the Jews have been forced out, the majority of them, just 100 years before, I believe. And as you see, there's Arabia, there's Syria, and Jerusalem's part of Syria, and Gaza. So all of that area is part of Syria. And there's Egypt. Now, all of these will eventually be combined one day under the Ottoman Empire. One day, 1,000 years later, it would be combined, just under 1,000 years later, it'd be combined under the Ottoman Empire. And this would all change because this is ever changing. So we've got to go back and say that, okay, for just before this period of 600 BC, Israel existed. Israel existed back then for a short amount of time, and before that it had been Egypt, and afterwards it'd be the Ottoman Empire, and then it would be what I will argue is distinctly Palestinian and known as Palestinian around the world. As always, to find out more about what used to be, I went to the newspaper archives, and I went back to 1725. I thought that was far enough to go. In this case, it's the 5th of June, 1725, and I found Palestine here. And here we are in the book itself. This is the book that was advertised in 1725. It's called A New Journey Through the Kingdoms and Provinces of Italy, Greece, Egypt, and Palestine, as also through Switzerland, Alsace, and Netherlands, written by a French officer who traveled those countries in the years 1721, 1722, and 1723 in, what was that, 25 familiar letters to a friend. Although it's hard to see, we are in the North American. It's the 29th of June, 1799. And what we got in amongst this is a telegram from London. There's a lot going on. War is happening. It's the Napoleonic War. It's the Napoleonic era. And it says, in the midst of so many disasters, we make no doubt that the Directory finds great consolation in the more or less exaggerated accounts of the progress of Bonaparte in Palestine and Syria, which will be seen in another part of this paper. And it's talking about how Bonaparte is trying to get some sort of help in Palestine and Syria. Let's find out more.
Our story starts here in 1799. Outside the walls of Acre in Ottoman-controlled Palestine. An army under Napoleon Bonaparte besieged the city. all part of a campaign to defeat the Ottomans and establish a French presence in the region. In search of allies, Napoleon issued a letter offering Palestine as a homeland to the Jews under French protection. He called on the Jews to rise up against what he called their oppressors. Napoleon's appeal was widely publicized, but he was ultimately defeated. In Acre today, the only memory of him is a statue atop a hill overlooking the city. Yet Napoleon's project for a Jewish homeland in the region under a colonial protectorate did not die. 40 years later, the plan was revived by the British, this time as a means of thwarting the rising power of Egyptian governor Muhammad Ali. In 1840, British Foreign Secretary Lord Palmerston wrote to his ambassador in Constantinople, urging him to convince the Sultan and his entourage to open Palestine for the immigration of Jews. At that time, there were estimated to be no more than 3,000 Jews in Ottoman-controlled Palestine.
Greater Syria was a major region of the Middle East at the turn of the 20th century. It became part of the Ottoman Empire in 1516 and remained Ottoman until the end of the First World War in 1918. Greater Syria's southern province, Palestine, was an active part of the Ottoman world. Trade boomed in its commercial centers, which included Jerusalem, Jaffa, and Haifa.
فلسطين كان فيها شعب نشيط، فعال، منتج، مفكر، مبدع.
But the First World War changed everything. In November 1918, the Allied powers of Britain, France, Italy, and Japan defeated the Central Powers of Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and importantly, the Ottoman Empire. Britain and France conspired to divide Greater Syria to their best advantage. But they could not agree on the future of Palestine. So in 1920, the League of Nations put it under interim British control or mandate. Some Christian and Zionist Jewish writers describe Palestine as, quote, a land without a people.
منذ قرنين وأكثر والحركة الصهيونية المسيحية غير اليهودية ابتدأت قبل الصهاينة اليهود بالادعاء إنه فلسطين لا يوجد فيها أحد، شراذم بدو، شراذم فلاحين، لا يوجد شعب ولا يوجد حضارة، لا يوجد زراعة، والإزاء والأخبار أنه لا يوجد شيء في فلسطين يستحق الذكر. هذا سبق حتى مولد هرزل هذا الكلام.
But this film looks at the region in the 20th century from a different perspective. Here, historians and personal testimony by contemporary witnesses argue that, far from being an empty wilderness, Palestine was a vibrant Arab country with a developing commercial and community infrastructure.
So there you are already. There's a lot of arguments on both sides, isn't there? There's the people who are on the Palestinian side, mainly Arabic people, saying, yes, there were distinct people there before. Look at all of the evidence. Here's all of this trading happened, all of these video images of pre-1948, and it looks pretty bustling. It looks like there's a Palestinian people doing things there before 1948. And then the other side is an argument that there were no distinct Palestinian people, and there is some evidence for that as well. But the evidence may be a little contrived. Now, also, what the argument is on the one side, on the anti-Palestinian side, you could say, a lot of the arguments are semantics. It's just about the definition of words. And we'll see that in this clip now. And this is the guys from the Rand Institute.
Let's start from the first map that shows the area, the wider area before 1947. And what I see here, Elan, is a few Jewish settlements, and everything else supposedly belongs to the Palestinians. So is this an accurate representation of what was happening?
No, this map is fundamentally dishonest. I think it's designed to fool people and create a narrative that is far from the truth. So we should go panel by panel through this map, and it's good to start with this first panel. But I think it's important to say, to answer your question, did Israel steal the land? The answer is no. It did not steal the land. And I think there's more to be said about the issue of, is there such a thing as Palestinian land? Is there such a thing as Jewish land? And I think the answer to that is also no. There's land that's owned by individuals. And then you can ask, what is their heritage? What is their background? What is their religion? What kind of beliefs do they have? But there is no land that's owned by a collective.
So do you hear the argument there? The argument isn't that the Palestinians don't have the right to own the land under the idea of nation states. He's saying that nation states don't own the land. He's saying that no collective at all owns the land because he's a libertarian, a hyper-libertarian, a Randian libertarian. They're the worst libertarians.
And I think that's one of the pieces of context that this kind of map drops. And the other thing to say as just set up for this map in general is that this map is an excellent example of a fallacy that Ayn Rand identified called the fallacy of dropping context. So knowledge is not atomic. Knowledge is a network. Knowledge is something that's integrated. And if you rip something out of context, we know this from when people rip quotes out of context. That happens all the time. But if you rip knowledge out of context, it is not useful. You can't understand what you're being told. And it's usually used by people who are trying to lie to you or deceive you or trick you in some way. And I think this map is an excellent case study of that fallacy.
And this is why followers of Ayn Rand are so fun to listen to, because in actual fact, this guy himself is presenting the fallacy that he's describing, because he's leaving the context out that we live in a world where nation states see themselves as owners of land, and international law sees that too. Sees that these nation states, this area, this territory is of a country, of a people, and that it is sovereign. He's leaving that out.
So let's look at this map that you asked me about. This map is ambiguous over an important issue. So in one respect, the white areas that you're seeing represent settlements, so where people of Jewish extraction are living. What does the green represent? It is certainly not where people live, because big parts of this area are unlivable at this time. They're either desert, they're uninhabitable, they're not arable land, you can't farm them, there's no irrigation, there's just no civilization in some parts of these. So it's just not true that this is representing the same thing on both sides. So what the green is trying to tell you is like this whole area was somehow peopled, and the white was peopled, and those are the two groups we're thinking about. But that's not historically true. What the green is showing you is a claim for collective ownership. And I think the important thing to see here is that there is no such thing. And the second thing that's important as a sort of a principle that should condition this whole context is that the idea of this area as belonging exclusively and for eternity to the Palestinians is an essential tenet of the Palestinian cause. It is not a claim that has existed before the cause in any meaningful way.
It's also got to be stated that the idea of this area as belonging exclusively and for eternity to the Jewish people is an essential tenet of the Israeli state too. Both claims are disputed.
Of the troubles in Ireland, the poet William Butler Yeats once wrote, "Great hatred, little room, maimed us at the start." In Palestine at the start, there was plenty of room, more than enough room, for a prosperous Jewish state and a prosperous Arab state. After World War I ended, with the dismantling of the Ottoman Empire, the League of Nations established the Mandate for Palestine, including all of the land that is now Israel, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip, plus the entire territory east of the Jordan River, now called the Kingdom of Jordan. The area under the Mandate was as large as Syria and about half as large as Iraq. yet the total population at the time was less than 1 million, of whom 10% were Jews. It was in that vast, underdeveloped and underpopulated territory that the British had promised in the language of the 1917 Balfour Declaration to support the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. The declaration also promised that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine.
And the Balfour Declaration that they mentioned there was a declaration by Balfour from the Foreign Office dated November the 2nd, 1917. And it states, "Dear Lord Rothschild, I have much pleasure in conveying to you, on behalf of His Majesty's government, the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the Cabinet. His Majesty's government views with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. It being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country, I should be grateful if you would bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation." Balfour. But the question in the last video was about a vast, underdeveloped, underpopulated land of Palestine. And that's the question. Is that a myth? Is this letter from 1917, was around this time, Palestine a vast, underdeveloped, underpopulated area?
Palestinian society in 1920 was a society in transition. It was the period of globalization that had led in the last quarter of the 19th century to a degree of development, certainly in the cities, Jaffa, Haifa, and to some extent Jerusalem.
Jerusalem was becoming an important commercial center, as were the ports of Gaza and Jaffa. They combined to turn Palestine into a trading hub with Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. These old trading records in the Jerusalem archives are evidence of its business activity. Jerusalem exported soap to Egypt, Italy, and Greece through Gaza, grain to Egypt, Rhodes, and Dubrovnik through Jaffa, cotton to France and Izmir, and antiques and religious gifts to Istanbul, Italy, Portugal, and Spain. Gaza and Jaffa also imported rice and fabrics from Egypt, textiles from Istanbul, glassware from China, shawls from India, and lead from France and the Netherlands in Europe. Through trade, Palestinian cities kept pace with development in the rest of the world in the late 19th century. Palestine also developed a transport infrastructure and built a railway network to connect Jerusalem and other towns and cities with the ports on the Mediterranean.
When one considers the economic impact of Jewish settlement in Palestine, one notes that while the land had people on it, those people were concentrated for about 700 years in the hilly areas. This was a part of the Muslim strategy against the Crusaders: keep the shores clear. And thus, conveniently for the Zionists, they could establish themselves in those shore areas where there were very little by way of local inhabitants. Hence the dispossession of local inhabitants was very limited. About
2,000 families of peasants dispossessed with compensation. The development of the areas along the shore by the Jews attracted manpower, especially from the east bank of Jordan, but also from Syria and Lebanon. So ironically, to some extent, a good many of the Palestinians who are now in conflict with Israel in the West Bank are as newcomers to this land as most of the Zionists are. People unfamiliar with the Middle East think that Israel is the only novelty on the political map. And this is, of course, a grave error. Most Middle Eastern states are very new, and almost all of them are born on the debris of the Ottoman Empire in World War I.
In 1969, Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir made headlines with this comment: "There is no such thing as the Palestinian people. It's not as if we came and threw them out and took their country. They didn't exist." Golda's statement was controversial, but as it turned out, many Arab leaders and historians agreed with her. In 1937, Arab leader Ani Abdul Hadi made this statement to the British Peel Commission: "There is no such country as Palestine. Palestine is a term the Zionists invented. There is no Palestine in the Bible. Palestine is alien to us." Nearly a decade later, Arab historian Philip Hitti agreed. In his testimony to the Anglo-American Committee, "There is no such thing as Palestine in history. Absolutely not." In 1956, a Saudi representative to the UN stated, "It is common knowledge that Palestine is nothing but southern Syria." And more recently, Syrian dictator Hafez al-Assad gave this lecture to PLO leader Yasser Arafat. Never forget this one point: there is no such thing as a Palestinian people. There is no Palestinian entity. Palestine is an integral part of Syria.
With the Peel Commission of 1936, the British government offered for the first time the partition of the land, the partition of Palestine into a Jewish Palestine and into an Arab Palestine. We were all Palestinians because this was the nature of this administrative unit, Palestina. Now the Palestinians are owning this nationality as being the nation of Palestine, but this is not quite historically true.
So what is the historical truth? Who are the Palestinians and what are their claims to the land of Israel? Let's take a look. Many Palestinian Arabs, including Arafat, have claimed to be descendants of the ancient Canaanites. A convenient argument, since the Canaanites were the first known inhabitants of the land of Israel. Even as recently as May of 2014, a PA spokesman stated that the Palestinians have been in the land for 5,000 years. But history shows that there's no way the Palestinians could be related to the Canaanites, because the Canaanites were almost completely obliterated by the Israelites in the 13th century BC. The few that remained were assimilated into Israelite culture.
The Palestinian people are incredibly diverse. For example, when you go to the northern regions, people typically have higher levels of ancient Anatolian DNA. And when you go to the south towards Egypt, people typically have higher levels of ancient Natufian-related ancestry. What's interesting about the Palestinian genome is that they are a combination of the three Stone Age populations that shaped the Levant. We are going to look at the Palestinian genome through a variety of different time periods to understand who these people are from a genetic perspective. Over here, I've got a Stone Age DNA breakdown of the average Palestinian genome. And interestingly, what we see is that 33% of their DNA is Natufian related. The Natufians were a proto-agriculturalist culture from the Levant who lived between 15,000 to 11,500 years ago. Today, this genomic component is found highest in populations found in Yemen. But if you look closely at this breakdown over here, what you see is that around 35% of the average Palestinian genome is Anatolian Neolithic farmer derived. The Anatolian Neolithic farmers lived just north of the Natufians. Around 9,000 years ago, they begin to migrate into both Europe and the Levant. And by entering into the latter, they mix with the Natufians, forming a new genomic component known as Levant Neolithic farmer. Levant Neolithic farmer DNA makes up around 50 to 60% of the Palestinian genome, and it is a characteristic genetic signal found in West Asia as well as parts of Europe. The Stone Age in the Levant ended approximately 7,000 years ago, and was soon followed by the Copper Age. The Copper Age was characterized by mass movements of Copper Age Iranian people known as the Iranian Chalcolithics. Before they migrated, the people in the Levant were almost as genetically divergent to the Iranian people as East Asians are to Europeans today. But over the course of thousands of years, there were waves of diverse populations that migrated into the Levant, bringing a distinct Iranian Chalcolithic component into the region, and setting the foundation for groups such as the Canaanites. The Canaanites were a distinctive northwestern Semitic-speaking culture that lived in the heart of the Bronze Age world. They were expert seafarers who, 3,500 years ago, colonized territories throughout the Mediterranean, reaching as far as the Iberian Peninsula. Using techniques similar to what I offer in my deep ancestry analysis, I have performed a Bronze Age statistical DNA comparison of the Palestinian genome against all the Bronze Age DNA samples available in the G25 database. The Palestinians derive a significant portion of their ancestry, between 50 to 80%, from groups genetically similar to the Bronze Age Canaanites.
Are you descendants of the Canaanites?
هل أنتم منحدرين من الكنعانيين؟ هل أسلافكم كنعانيين؟
صحيح.
Correct.
Yeah, how does he know this? Where did he
كيف
learn
تعرف
this?
إنك أنت منحدر من الكنعانيين؟
يعني من أجدادنا بنعرف.
We know this from our grandfathers and.
Does he think that the Israelis are also
هل
descendants?
برأيك الإسرائيليين برضو منحدرين من الكنعانيين؟
والله ما بعرف الإسرائيليين هذول ما.
I don't know. He lifts his hand and says I don't know.
هل بتآمن إنه الفلسطينيين هم أصحاب الأرض الأصليين؟ Yes, I do believe this. Because of the Canaanites.
Mm-hmm.
We are their descendants.
The Palestinians are the descendants of the Canaanites.
Yeah.
So are the Jews.
هم اليهود كمان أصلهم كنعانيين. That's true, but originally it's for the Palestinians before it was for the Jews.
Are you descendants of the Canaanites?
هل أسلافك كانوا كنعانيين؟
أكيد.
For sure.
Okay. Do you think the Israelis are as well?
هل برأيك برضو الإسرائيليين أجدادهم كانوا إسرائيليين؟ أجدادهم كانوا كنعانيين. سوري. هل برأيك إنه الإسرائيليين أجدادهم أو أسلافهم كانوا كنعانيين؟
إحنا ما بنعرف في شيء اسمه إسرائيل.
We don't recognize anything called Israel.
Okay, maybe the Jews, let's say.
طب اليهود هل برأيك كانوا أجدادهم أو أسلافهم كنعانيين؟
كمان لا احنا بنعتبر انهم هم كانوا برا واجوا هون واخذوا ارضنا يعني ظلم يعني هيك بنعتقد.
Also no, we believe that they came from outside and they took our land unjustly.
Are you, as a Palestinian, a descendant of the Canaanites?
هل أنت كفلسطيني أجدادك كانوا كنعانيين؟
أجدادي؟
Are your like great grandfathers Canaanites?
Yes. No.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. How do you know that?
كيف تعرف هذا الشيء؟
من جدودنا اللي قبلنا.
From our grandfathers from before.
They said that they were Canaanites?
هل هم حكوا هذا الشيء إنهم أصولهم كنعانية؟
صحيح.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Are the Israelis also?
هل الإسرائيليين برضو أصولهم كنعانية؟
Now look at what this does for modern Jews. Modern Jews in this study has got about half their DNA from ancient Canaanites. All right, this shows us that we have an ancient connection to the land. Some people aren't going to like that it's half Canaanite. Okay, they were like, there's no way it's Canaanite. We're not Canaanites. But let's face it, Jews were a mixed multitude that left Egypt. They came to the land of Canaan. And how many times do we read about proselytes, about respecting proselytes, about treating proselytes properly in the Bible? It's telling us there probably were a lot of proselytes around. That's why they talked about them so much. I should also mention a third possibility, and that is, it is possible there are people from Canaan that have only been found in Canaan, and therefore they're labeled Canaanite. Perhaps they, in their own times, would have been labeled something else. What I really want to get to, though, what the whole point of this is not whether you're bothered by Canaanite or not. It's that Jews, for the most part, left this land nearly 2,000 years ago. They come back, 1,800 years after they left, and they still have half their DNA from this land. Half their DNA is tied to this land, and it's equal to the people that never left. All right, that's big. It's equal to the people who never left, even though Jews have been gone for nearly 2,000 years. All right, now I want to look at how this affects modern Palestinians, modern Palestinian Arabs. I'm going to get into that in just a minute. So Palestinians get about half their DNA from ancient Canaanites as well. The other half were likely impacted by the Muslim conquest, which is probably the most obvious. That moved a lot of people and changed a lot of marriages. And then where did these other halves come from? As I mentioned before, Arabia, other places in the Near East, and East Africa. I don't think that should bother anyone. It makes logical sense. What's important to note here is there's no distinguishable South Europe DNA. South Europe is Greece. There's no Greek DNA in these people. Even if they were descended from the Philistines, I'm not saying they are, I'm just saying that the Philistines, their DNA was gone after 200 years. So you're talking, another 2,700, 2,800 years down the road. That DNA is certainly not going to be in anyone today. So there's no Philistine DNA. It's not in modern Palestinians, and it wasn't even the modern Philistines once their kingdom was gone.
So thank you for coming on that long and complex voyage with me. I really enjoyed the fact that it wasn't what I expected. I wanted to find out who the Palestinian people were, and I was expecting different answers. But the answers that I found were scientific. They were genetic testing, they were genomes, they were the understanding that the Palestinian people, 50 to 80% related to the Canaanite people. The Canaanite people from exactly where the Palestinians are, and the Palestinian people predate Israelites to an extent, or the state of Israel and any Israeli state before and Jewish state before. However, scientifically, we also know that genetically, the Jewish people, the people of Israel, are also 50% made up of 50% genetics from Canaanite origins, meaning the Palestinians and the Jews are basically cousins from distant relatives, occupying roughly the same land. What is extremely interesting is that the Jews were given an order by God to destroy the Canaanites. And if you listen to some of the people out there, some historians, they see the Bible as a history book. They see it as a textbook, as accurate. So when God said to the Israelites, kill the Canaanites, destroy them, exterminate them, and the book says that's what they did, then these scholars, these people who have got sense anywhere else, say that is exactly what happens, and the Canaanites don't exist anymore because God told them to, and they did exactly what God said. But that's not what happens. They go into a land, they kill the ruling class, and then they leave again. That's the reality. And if you look at the actual evidence on the ground, it shows that the Jews were very slow in the destruction of anything that was Canaanite, and there were elements of Canaanite culture everywhere. The idea that the Jews could just assimilate them in the kingdom of Judea or the kingdom of Israel It just is poppycock, fairy tale. Armies come and go. They come and they go again. They don't go and they take every single person who live in the land and take them elsewhere. That's not how war or armies work, especially not back in the day. They come in, they conquest, sack a city maybe, they take a load of stuff, and then they go back home to their own homeland. They take that stuff away. They take their slaves away. But the people who stay in the homeland are still of that place. Their ancestors were of that place, and they stay within that place. And it doesn't matter. Yes, there's great migrations, and the Jewish story is very rare in history. They try and act like it's not, but there's only a few times where you had great migrations like that. But mostly in the farms and the villages around cities that get sacked, the genetics stay the same. The people stay the same for thousands of years because we got trapped in. Next door was a new tribe, and next door was another tribe. We can't move that far. There's not many options. So, what have we learned? Well, we've learned that the Palestinian people are in their homeland and they're being attacked. Now, they occupy, in Gaza at least, they occupy where the Philistines once occupied. And it was never is a part of the Kingdom of Israel or a part of the Kingdom of Judea back in the day either. This would be a new conquest, wouldn't it? This is a really complicated thing. And so you got to get all sides, all angles. You got to listen to it all. But when you have a load of people try and convince you that the Palestinian people don't exist, that they don't matter, that history, they got no history, that they don't give them the right to exist in the first place, that is really serious stuff. And that's where we are. The denial that they ever existed. Not they're denying their right to exist now, because that would show the face, the true face, wouldn't it? No, they deny their right to exist in the past. That's a much more esoteric idea. The Palestinian people never existed. The state of Palestine never existed. A nation never existed. But those people who live there now are ancestors of the people who used to live there and used to live there and so on and so forth. All the way down their family lines. Thank you for watching this program. Remember to like, share, and subscribe and all of that nonsense. Please, if you can, come to my websites, come to newspaste.com or johnnyvedmore.com. You can join me on Patreon where you get early access and access to me directly. So please come support this work, support independent journalism. I also have some shows. I have NEWSPASTE podcast, NewsHound, NEWSPASTE, of course, NEWSTHEORY, and Audit Everything that you can find on newspaste.com. Come, get involved, have some fun. Learn some stuff. You can also read my work, some of my articles on sites like newspaste.com, UK Column, Unlimited Hangout, and I write long-form articles that are about history, the history that you're not allowed to know. Well, come learn it. I'm Johnny Vedmore. Thank you for joining me.
Attention, I'm very close to That's man, standing like right in the line of a gorilla. There's a moment there where he's thinking, then this is how I die.
Young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina and so on, that we penetrate the cabinets.